Okay. So, um, so the keyword uh, in a lot of the work that I do is humanity, or you could also call it authenticity or vulnerability, or there's a lot of words related to it. Human expression, connection, and so on. But these days, I'm using the word humanity a lot. Um, and and when I think about the word humanity, I think about it on three different levels. Um, so the first one is on the individual level. It's about just the freedom to have my thoughts and to have my feelings and to express them, um, which sounds very straightforward, but actually is not. Then besides the individual level, there's the relational level. So how I can be true to myself while in relation to another person. And I like this quote from like Ubuntu, which is like one of the big philosophies in Africa and certain countries, which is like I am because we are. Like we exist in relationship to each other. Um, and then the final level is the societal level, right? So how in the end everyone is connected to everyone, and how I can create freedom for myself at the expense of other people, or trying to spread the concept of freedom itself. Uh, so one quote that's linked to that is like nobody's free until everybody's free. By which I think uh, like this is from the like U.S. Civil rights movement in like 60s and 70s, and it basically means that if we create freedom just for this person or for this person, it's still conditional. We're not creating structural freedom in society. Um, yeah, so in my work, I'm always connected a bit to those three levels, and and because that's like pretty big stuff, pretty big concepts. Um, my way of making that simple and making that relevant in my day-to-day life is um, by reducing it to the act of real moments, uh, which are moments in which the way I express myself on the outside is aligned with my inner truth. And this is for me also in my personal life. It's like a kind of guiding principle. So I don't try to be the most free person or the most authentic person or the most enlightened or whatever, but I try to give myself more possibilities um, in the moment. And sometimes I will succeed and sometimes I will not. And each are okay. And then I also wish to support others in doing so. And not just through my work, but also in my daily life. I like to think about how the way I show up in the world, whether it creates more freedom for people to express their truth or less, right? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel self-conscious about speaking too long, so I'm probably gonna ask you this a few times so you can support me. Um, and also tell me if you if you like if it's like no, it's getting boring. Um, now now I've spent a lot of time thinking about how can you create these real moments. You know, sometimes they just happen. It's not that they necessarily have to be consciously created. If I'm just on a dance floor and I'm dancing and it's great and I'm having the best time of my life, I don't have to, or if I'm making music and it's just all working out, or I'm having a great conversation, or, you know, it just happens. Um, but we can also create these moments, like create moments where we express what's true for us, which can be as simple as simply just saying no when we don't want something, which I sometimes think no is one of the hardest words in the English language to say. to really own a no. So to create these moments, we first have to notice, what is my inner truth? If I'm gonna express that, if I'm gonna do something with it, I have to at least know what it is, right? So for example, which emotions am I feeling? Which is not always so easy to tell. Or what do I want? Or what don't I want? Especially if these things have not been allowed when we were younger, then you might cut yourself off from it, right? Now, if you get as far as noticing what is my inner truth, what am I feeling, what do I want, what am I thinking, then the next step would be to welcome that. So let's say you're very bored right now in this call and you're noticing it. You're like, okay, I'm actually really bored. I don't want to be here. Can you welcome that, or are you telling yourself, no, I need to be a good student and I need to sit here and Mette will get pissed off at me if I show that I am bored. So I will not welcome it, but I will, put a smile on my face and look good. If you can welcome it, then the next step would be to act on it in some kind of way, right? So you might interrupt me and ask for something to change. You might realize, oh, I actually just want to be lying down. Maybe that's what I need. I still want to be here, but I want to lie down. Or maybe you want to leave the call or whatever it is. But this is not so easy to do these steps. And I think there are two things that are kind of underneath all this. And one is to feel safe, and one is to feel permission to show certain sides of yourself. So safety is about, am I allowed to exist in this room before I've even done anything? Is it okay that I am here? Which is strongly linked to identity, right? If you have like an identity which has a lot of power in society, then the concept of safety might be, like, huh, what are people even talking about? And if you have an identity which is, let's say, oppressed in society, then this becomes very relevant. But I would argue that it's relevant for everyone, but just not everybody recognizes it as easily. And then permission is allowed. What am I allowed to do here in this context right now? Like again, an obvious example is which emotions can I show here? Can I interrupt the Zoom call if I have a question? Like which behaviors are considered okay and which ones are not okay. And then each of them have like an inner and an outer component. So some of these things are true within this context. There is a certain level of safety and there are certain behaviors that are okay here and that aren't in other places or the other way around. But a lot of it is also internalized. So you will feel a certain level of safety and you will feel permission to do certain things or not do certain things depending on the life experiences that you've had so far, right? It's like a mirror of everything that you've lived through and you somehow store it, and that becomes a bit the rule book for life to come. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Cool. So if you put the whole thing together, it looks like this, which is a lot of words.
Pretty cute.
Say it again.
Pretty cute slides.
Nice, huh? I made this. And then in the way, I think about life through this model. So I think of life as this, it's like you're just jumping from pyramid to pyramid, and every time all the parameters change, right? In this moment, there's so much outer safety, but then I go hang out with that friend and the safety goes up, but then I go to my family dinner, I don't know, and it goes down, or I walk the street in a dress and I might, it just changes constantly. So it's kind of jumping from pyramid to pyramid. Yeah. And then the question is like, how the hell do you make that easier to create these real moments as you as you make your way like through this forest, let's say. Let's take a breath. Now, the thing that we can do is that we can create imprints of experiences that haven't been possible for us so far. So if I feel like, oh, I cannot honestly talk about this thing, or if I feel like, oh, it's not okay to have certain kinds of physical interactions, or whatever it is that is hard for me to access, the way one way to overcome that is to have positive experiences where these things are okay. And then slowly I build more safety and permission to do those things. And this doesn't happen by doing something once or twice, like when I give like a workshop, and then sometimes I do let's say a practice and someone has done it already. And then sometimes people say, oh, I've done this one already. And I have to laugh sometimes a little bit on the inside, because it's like, yeah, like that's kind of the point, to repeat certain practices, because you've maybe had hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of imprints of doing something a certain way, and now we start to create experiences where it's a different way, but it needs repetition for it to have like a lasting effect in your actual life, right? So how can you create these positive experiences? Because if I don't know, if I suddenly start to be super honest with all the people in my life, that might actually lead to negative experiences, because maybe some people are like, okay, what the fuck are you doing now? And they might get offended, or which basically means their nervous system goes into a fight flight response. And then instead of a positive experience, I might be having a conflict. So this is why we create these kinds of supportive environments, right? So that's why we maybe go to workshops, or hang out in certain spaces that have a certain intention, and where oh, if I go here, I'm much more likely to have a positive experience with such or so. If I go to an ecstatic dance, I'm much more likely to be welcome in freely expressing my body. If I go to some kind of conscious sexuality event, I'm much more likely to be welcome with my sexual thoughts, that sort of thing. And what then basically happens in these supportive environments is that, ideally speaking, there's a lot of outer safety and a lot of outer permission, if it goes well. And then you start to see the limitations of your inner safety and your inner permission. So, if in this Zoom call right now, I would say, even if it would be a completely safe place where all emotions are welcome and everyone's allowed to, I don't know, cry or rage or do whatever, in your system, you might still feel like, oh no, this is not safe at all. Or I don't trust that there is this permission to do this. And the goal is that through these imprints, you slowly lift your inner safety and your inner permission. And then as you internalize it, different ways of expressing yourself become more and more available in different contexts of your life. Let's take a breath. Does this make sense, and is this interesting so far?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, definitely.
So what I focus on to make this happen in my own life, but also when I work with groups or people, is three things to make this happen. So one is confidence, another one is skill, and the third one is sensitivity. So confidence is basically about creating more safety and permission in my system, right? And the safety actually a lot of it is through the nervous system. So if you imagine that today you were going to have, let's say, a difficult conversation with someone where you're going to talk about a difficult situation, and you now remember how you showed up for this Zoom call, and you would show up like that for that conversation. Or if you would have that conversation, but you did the 5 minutes of movement and shaking that you just did, it's going to be a very different conversation, most likely, right? Skill is about, okay, what are actual ways in which either I can express myself. So for example, how do I talk about my emotions, or how do I give feedback, or how do I share a judgment that I'm holding, or how do I talk about something that happened 2 years ago, but it's still bothering me? You know, it's like, how do you frame, for example, these conversations? But also, how can you have, I don't know, more free sexual interactions that feel safe, where you talk about boundaries and create a frame around sex so that you can actually relax in that more, right? There's all sorts of possibilities, but there's a skill set that comes with this that is often applied by people who facilitate workshops, and we then bring that into the workshop and you do it there. But I talk a lot about facilitate your life and then bring this this kind of thinking into your actual life. And the third is sensitivity, which is just about staying open to the other person's perspective as well. So not just trying to I've definitely fallen into this trap where I thought, oh, I now have the key to how to live a good, authentic life. And I started to kind of impose that a little bit on other people, which creates more distance than connection, I can tell you. So there's an attunement and there's a thing of not to fall into arrogance or into becoming dogmatic about this is how everyone should live, but actually staying curious to other people and other ways of doing things. Take a breath. I think we're getting somewhere. I just put this image in because I liked it. Because it seems to bring these things together. Okay, so I'll wrap up with one final thing, which is like how so in these weekends we go basically we work with all this stuff always, and each weekend has a different focus. And also, if you join the program, these 5 perspectives are still useful to think about. So the first focus point is just the self, myself, my body, my nervous system. Like, how does my relationship to myself affect how I show up in life, which is a lot, I would say. Then the next step is where it becomes more relational, right? So what happens between me and people? How do I, let's say the self is, for example, how do I connect with myself before I go into a difficult conversation? And then the next layer is, and then how do I have that conversation? And how do we navigate this? And what do we do, like, in between us? The third level is kind of, okay, how does all of this tie into like community, society, social justice, equality, all of that, which is often the layer that can feel a bit overwhelming, right? When I know that when I start to think about this layer too much, I start to collapse in my nervous system. So I can actually then take it back to the first layer, so I can actually regulate my nervous system or check if I'm regulated enough to even think about this perspective. But when I do think about it, I see that in the end, everything is tied to this. You know, if you're, let's say, if you're sitting in a park and you have breasts and you take your t-shirt off, that's a political act, whether you want to or not, kind of, because in the end, all these things, all our actions shape the world in one direction or another. And yeah, and I think it's important for me in a program to pay attention to this layer of like, hey, what is the world that we are creating, and who is benefiting the most in this world and who is not, and how can we relate to that and make that better in the end for everyone, and not from a place of guilt and not from a place of, oh, I now have to carry the whole weight of the world on my shoulders. But I do think it's important to be in relation to this. Yeah, especially also in these times where we see that so many of the freedoms that even, you know, I grew up in the Netherlands and there's so many freedoms that I've taken for granted, and I see them going back in many democracies. So yeah, I cannot really just take that for granted and accept it to still have the same freedoms in 10 years from now that we have today. Take a breath with that. And this is also where there's one more refinement to this pyramid, where it's not just acting on our inner truth, but also actually questioning our inner truth and questioning our views and beliefs, and where does that all come from? And yeah, questioning the structures in society. Finally, there's one weekend which is like about self-leadership and co-creation, or you can say it's just a focus of how can you shape your life as you want it to be, which is again a focus that can feel daunting. It's like, oh fuck, do I now have to start doing all sorts of things? Which is why I like to emphasize that for me, actually, a great example of self-leadership is asking for support, asking for help, being in relationship, asking for a hug when I need one, cooking myself a meal, you know? So that's why I put it together also with co-creation. It's like, how can we live in relation, in community, and lift each other up? And sometimes some people have more capacity and sometimes others. And how can we learn to give, but definitely also learn to receive? That's often much harder for people. And then the final thing is just integration and continuation, because by the end, we'll just have traveled for 6 months together. And then there's that weird moment that the meetings end, but the Telegram group will continue to exist. And this is a moment where we can together redefine, like, hey, how do we want to move on with this group? Which, yeah, in my experience, when you travel together with a group for 6 months and you go in and out of your life over such a long time, it becomes a really tight group. Yeah, and then we're back here where it's like navigating, you know, this field, this forest of pyramids. And hopefully not just feeling more resourced and skilled to do it alone, but also have a group of people to share it with. Ta-da! Feels so corporate.
No, I think it's very nice to have something to look at and like follow. I think it's.
I wonder if there's any like reflections or anyone that's like, oh, a little nugget that I took out of this or something that helped me see, or
I think
Uh,
you can go first.
I just wanted to say that it was already at the beginning. I really liked what you said, that how we show up, can also enhance the freedom of other people, or how other people can express freely. I really liked that part, and would be curious to hear more about that in the weekends. Yeah, that was my reaction.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, when you started talking about the permission and safety, I wonder, I was like, oh, are you open to me adding something? Because I exactly thought about this notion of inner and outer permission and safety, and then you mentioned that, and so it made me feel excited that I felt we have a very like similar understanding of these two things of inner and outer permission and safety, and how they're obviously very interconnected. Yeah, and I like the colors a lot. I think they're well chosen.
Did it apply for anyone to their life where you're like, oh wow, this helped me? I'm not saying this, I'm not fishing for compliments, but I'm just wondering, I'm just looking for some like how you tie it in with your life, or
So these concepts of permission and safety, I've been thinking a lot about already after our last Zoom call that we had, like what was it, like a month ago? That really landed deeply with me, and I've been thinking a lot about it in different social situations, how to increase inner and outer permission, really. Both for myself and for people that I'm interacting with. I think there's a lot to be found in making that a conscious effort, right? Like giving permission to both myself and the people around me. It's great.
nice.
Yeah, when you were talking just before you started describing the weekends, I had things that I felt like I wanted to share, but I decided that I was not going to interrupt and I was going to be a good student. So I didn't. And now it feels like it's all gone. But I would just say that I definitely agree with what you said and have experienced what you said in terms of having these spaces where the outer permission is higher means that I meet the limit then becomes my own inner permission, and it actually makes you realize that in a lot of cases the limit really is the inner permission, but we are conditioned to believe that, or it's easier to believe that it's the outer permission in whatever society told you could or couldn't do.
Yeah.
And I've definitely met that in the last year or so, and it's really interesting and fascinating. The only other thing I would say to that is that I have found so far that it's been easier for me to work on that in isolation with myself than into actually increasing that safety and permission in relation to others and with others. So it will be interesting to also kind of explore that more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and it also depends on group size, or there's so many, but this is also where it comes back to an interesting paradox I find around building safety in a group, because a lot of the practices that in theory build safety, they also require safety to even engage with them. So for example, even this shaking practice, if I'm in a group of people and I say, okay, everybody who wants can now stand up and shake your body for 5 minutes, a certain percentage of the group will be like, no, 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 that doesn't feel safe in itself. So
Yeah.
there's an interesting kind of paradox there.
But also not just in groups and workshops, but then to actually take it out of the workshops and create that in normal life. which is a different, challenge in itself, because you don't have that intention, right, of the group that comes together in order to X. So
Yeah. And like, for example, with the nervous system, like with the shaking stuff, like beginning of this year, I just agreed with myself that for like a month, I would do it 3 times a day, no matter what. And that gave me so many imprints of how good it was and what it did for me, that after that it became more available to just do it also when I noticed that I needed it. And I sometimes now even do it on the streets. I'm like, fuck it, I'm just gonna shake my body for 3 minutes. I don't care what people think, you know? But it was a long journey to get to that point.
What it brought up for me, and actually even before this call, was Mete?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
Okay.
just filling my water bottle.
Okay. Was
I'm leaving you.
was how could I bring more authenticity to challenging situations and groups in my life, like a work situation with like interaction with my boss, that I actually want to improve the communication between us and develop more safety. So how can I take a small step into growing our connection to something that will feel more safe for me, even that I get a lot of resistance towards it, and I don't necessarily connect to his point of view, but this is just the situation. So that's where my thoughts about it, and I do practice it and try to do it, but there's a lot of navigation and sometimes resistance, and I need to really grow slowly into it. So this is just one example.
Yeah. Can I say something about it?
Yeah, that's I'm done.
Yeah, so I would say that the slowness is key, right? So like on one side there's like the let's say the super supportive environment that managed to create a lot of safety, and then on the other side of the spectrum there's, let's say, your most challenging relationships, and there's kind of many levels in between. And I generally advise people to kind of start on the safe side of the spectrum and slowly make your way over. Or if it is in challenging situations, to start with small things, but not to go from, oh, I had a great experience in a workshop, to now I'm going to take the most challenging situation of my life. And, there's things in between. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Any final shares on this?
Maybe for me that goes in the direction, I actually like this image of the trees or the woods that you had, because it's at the first view for me it was a little bit overwhelming and had this notion of don't seeing the wood for the trees. But at the same time, I mean, our woods in our life, they are interconnected, and we are this interconnection, but there are also other interconnections. And the overwhelming for me comes from apply everything in every container or for every tree in this image, but it doesn't need to be that way. But for me, I think it's very important or very interesting for this program that there is this interwood connection in between this, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
which makes it interesting. And I mean, not every tree needs to be shaken, but you can apply different sorts of movement. It doesn't need to be like shaking to like regulate nervous system, but just maybe a walking meeting with your boss or something else that gives you like this idea of creating a more regulated nervous system or system.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my thoughts on that. I really like that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's also one of the main things that I always emphasize with people is just please be kind to yourself, because it's such an easy trap to make this again performative. I must get as good at this as possible. I must be the best person at expressing always my needs and my emotions, and it becomes, again, basically this is where the systemic, where the kind of capitalism, let's say, enters the idea of living a fulfilling life. It becomes again a performance of, oh, I must do this, and if I fail, then I didn't, and this happens a lot.
Or maybe also forgetting the context and the structural aspects that are shaping a situation and a relation. Like with your boss, I think there's a lot of things that shape that specific connection or the situation you're in. And so you alone and all the work that you'll be able to do will not be able to change all factors of a situation. It's just one component. And I think we're often like that there's a narrative of like, in the end, it's all our responsibility, and there's so many things that are not our responsibility or that are outside of our control, and how to also recognize like there are things that are part of that situation and they will probably remain, and how can I respond to them rather than kind of like burden myself even more with a situation like that.